My name is Matt Arnett, and I don't know where to start. My family, and actually I do know where to start. And it should start with Lonnie, because we wouldn't be here. I think it's safe to say we wouldn't be here, sitting here. I most certainly wouldn't know Mary Lee or Louisiana. And I want to introduce some other folks that are with us. Florine Smith, China Petway, and Marianne Petway. Three more wonderful quilt makers from GeesBend. Lonnie is in many ways responsible for my father's and then my understanding of this whole tradition. Not just the quilt making tradition, the Southern African American art making tradition, which, much like its musical counterpart, had flourished in the South for centuries, unlike its musical counterpart, which we know so much about, blues and jazz and everything from spirituals on through. The art stayed in its communities. It didn't get on trains and go to St. Louis or Chicago or leave its areas where it was created. And not the music eventually was performed, and it was intended to be played for people and eventually played for audiences, whereas the art that was made, whether it was quilts or sculpture or whatever it was usually made for smaller audiences, family, neighborhood. It didn't travel. And it wasn't until although my dad had an interest in the 70s, there wasn't literature, there wasn't information. It wasn't like you could read books that would tell you these things. So he went out and started looking. He'd been a big fan of the music that came out of the South, the Black South, and always felt like there must be, things like music don't develop in a vacuum. They usually come out of areas with a lot of culture, much like great architecture doesn't, there's great architecture, there's going to be great literature and great art. And he began looking for that. And in the early 80s, he met Lonnie. And my dad had traveled the world. He'd been everywhere that you can go to look at great art. And when he went to Lonnie's place, at that time, Lonnie had a 1 acre area, I guess, yard, where he created all of his work, and near the airport, which the city of Birmingham eventually tore down, tragically, because they didn't understand it, they didn't respect it. But my dad met Lonnie, who was the son of a quilt maker, grew up surrounded by quilts, and Lonnie really helped us understand the importance of all of this. And together, my dad and Lonnie went out looking for other people like Lonnie and documented dozens and dozens of artists, including Thornton Dial, who is somebody Lonnie found and introduced my dad to, and many others. And it was through that understanding, and which Lonnie helped us come to appreciate more fully, that we began to appreciate the role quilts played in that tradition, and went out looking for quilts and looking for places, and eventually that led us to GeesBend. And of course, once we found the amazing women in GeesBend, it wasn't long before Lonnie was with us down in GeesBend, and since that time has been to GeesBend dozens of times and traveled to many of the GeesBend exhibitions with the women, and has even he's stayed down in GeesBend with the women. And really, the show, it's called Mary Lee Bendoff, and it is focused on her and her family and her influences. It's really as much about Lonnie, even though his work isn't, there's not as much of his work in the show. It's as much about Lonnie and Thornton Dial and Louisiana and China as it is Mary Lee, although not to take anything away from Mary Lee. She's a tremendous artist, obviously, and we all recognize that. But it's a show that really, we hope, will take the idea of quilts, which are certainly a tradition people know about, and broaden their understanding about specifically where these quilts come from. GeesBendQuilts and the quilts made in places like Gees Bend come out of a tradition that has one foot in the American quilt making tradition, but its other foot is firmly in the Southern African American culture and art making tradition that Lonnie comes out of. In many ways, Mary Lee and not in many ways, in almost every way, Mary Lee and Lonnie Holly have more in common than, say, Mary Lee or Louisiana have in common with Nancy Crow, or fill in the blank with any, known American quilt maker. Their work comes out of that tradition. And I hope that through this show people will understand that and understand that more fully. I was sitting listening to them talk, and it occurred to me that you sit down with the intention of working with docents and talking about the art, but as soon as they start talking, and I guess I'm guilty of it too, you start to realize that the art that they make, we call it art, but to them it's an expression of something much deeper than art. So even though they're wanting to talk about art, all of a sudden they start realizing that art is, the art helps them express all these things that they're expressing here, and the work it's especially for the quilt makers. For Lonnie, it's been a little longer. Sitting talking about your art, that's kind of a foreign concept. And I know that when my dad and I met Mary Lee and Lou and the women over there, and we're calling it art, it's not art. It's just, at first it's just what we did to keep our children warm. But from our experience and from talking to artists and quilt makers, that it's about more than that. But it's not, as Lonnie was saying when you were talking about it's hidden. They don't give it all to you at once. You have to kind of, like a maze, feel your way into the core of it to really understand what it is. And they're not going to give you that immediately. You have to, in one way, earn the respect to be, much like children and the art. You don't tell everybody your deep, dark secrets, even your family. They have to earn that from you. And in many ways, the art is that way. Lonnie's art is on so many different levels. Lonnie keeps talking about the kids. Lonnie makes work that for his youngest kids, it means one thing, because it's something they can understand. It's at a level they can understand. And at its highest or deepest level, I can't understand it. But somewhere in the middle, it's for me. And then above, it's for people who are, Mensa members like Lonnie. I mean, it's a layered meaning. And whatever you can understand, that's what's for you. And neither one is more important than the other. The meaning for the children is just as important as the meaning for me, or the meaning for Mary Lee, or the meaning for somebody else. Yeah, maybe even more important.